actions taken in closed session.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On item 1, real property negotiation, council did not meet. That item was taken off agenda. On item 2, anticipated litigation, that was the 3-Bar Lane matter based on a threat of litigation from council for the property owner. Council provided settlement authority 5-0 to the city attorney. Item 3, conference with labor negotiator, council was updated and no reportable action was taken.
All right, thank you. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then following that, we'll have Pastor Fred for our invocation today. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could you, testing, could you guys just bow your heads and be in agreement with me with this prayer? Father, we just thank you. We thank you for this hour. I thank you, Father, for the city council members. We thank you, Father, for the city manager, city attorney, planning directors, public works director, and secretary. Lord, we thank you, Lord, that you said in Psalms 133, verse 1, how pleasant it is when the city council members come together in unity. I pray that tonight meeting will be a meeting of unity, for there you will command a blessing. Lord, if Norco needs a blessing, it needs now. It needed now. I thank you, Lord, that you said that the city council and the directors and the members, they walk by faith and not by sight, oh God. I thank you, Lord, that you will give them the vision, the fortitude to do the things that they need to do to make this city a thriving city for the future, for now and the future. I ask you this now in your Son's Jesus Christ's matchless name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Fred. All right. Tonight, the City Council is recognizing April as National Volunteer Month by presenting a proclamation to community members who have contributed to the economic, cultural, spiritual, and/or political development of our city. At this time, I'd like to invite up Marilyn Gersha, Pastor Fred, and then we have Christina and Joe on the list. Oh, and Joe, come up, please. I didn't see you sneak in. Have to have somebody hold your camera for you, Pastor. All right. Whereas in 1974, the United States government first established National Volunteer Week to celebrate the impact of volunteer service in our community. And whereas in 1991, President George W.H. Bush as National Volunteer Month as a part of his 1,000 Points of Light campaign and dedicated the month to recognizing the importance of volunteering and honoring the significant contributions volunteers make by generously donating their time and talents to worthy causes. And whereas in 2008, the city of Norco established its volunteer program to encourage community members to participate in civic activities that strengthen existing programs and promote the development of new programs. And whereas more than 500 registered volunteers invested 18,145 reported volunteer hours with an estimated value of over $540,000 from 22-23. And whereas the city of Norco recognizes its local volunteers who are essential to providing quality services to the residents of our community. And whereas the city of Norco is a diverse community that is honored to celebrate the history and legacies of volunteers who have contributed to the economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development of our city, state, and country. Therefore, I, Robin Grenmeyer, Mayor of the City of Norco, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim April 2023 as National Volunteer Month in the City of Norco, where all citizens, past, present, and future, are respected and recognized for their contributions to our community. And we're going to go ahead and let each of our honorees go ahead and have a few minutes to speak. So.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I've been in Norco most of my adult life, and it's one of the places that's amazed me that a good majority of the community is willing to volunteer. So I think it's amazing. I think it's what makes me happy to stay here and raise my family here. So thank you.
Hello, my name's Marilyn Gershaw. I just want to say, let me move that down a little bit. I've lived in Norco for 20 years. It's a wonderful town, and the volunteer spirit is well and alive. I want to thank the local businesses that do so much to contribute. I recently asked for donations for the Snowmageddon up in Crestline, and the local business response was phenomenal. Tractor Supply, Inland Vet, Cahoots, and then in Eastvale, Home Depot, Lowe's. It was just phenomenal. It was wonderful. And I want to give a shout out to Tractor Supply. They donated a brand new $2,000 snowblade to go up there, which was fantastic. I think it's so important what we can do locally as far as volunteering, but also beyond that, because it's like when you go out and volunteer for something that's out of the area, it's almost like traveling abroad. When I helped with the Ukrainian effort and I worked with a Ukrainian group in LA for half a day, it was fantastic. And I made a lot of new contacts, just like I did up on the mountain. So it's good to reach out also outside of town and let them see how great Norco people are. And let me just read this. I found this online and I can't remember who the quote is. Money is not the only commodity that is fun to give. We can give time, we can give our expertise, we can give our love, or simply give a smile. What does that cost? The point is, none of us can ever run out of something worthwhile to give. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pastor Fred Griffin, and I've been in this amazing city for at least 10 years, and I have felt the warmth and the embrace of this city. I love the concept of volunteering. We, as a church, we have volunteered and helped through the years, and given gifts and aid to homeless shelters in the Norco and Corona area. So I'm just blessed to be a part of a family, of a community that cares. And thank you. I appreciate you.
I did not prepare a speech, but thank you. I am part of Horse Week, part of South Shore Riders, and a few other groups. I'm hoping that we can get a lot more people motivated in town to step up. A lot of us are getting old, so we're trying to break in the newer generation. We are actually getting people from out of town coming in too, which is really good. I just want to say thank you and sorry.
So if council can come down and we'll take a picture real quick. So if you guys will come down and All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda. We have a presentation this evening on the Homeless Solutions Dashboard with Karen Roper.
Good evening, Mayor, honorable council members. It's always a privilege and an honor to be here before you. The purpose of the report today is to give you a high-level overview of all of the amazing things that have been accomplished since your council and the City of Corona Council approved the unique partnership and alliance between Corona and Norco. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you an overview in dashboard form, and also as a team with your community services staff and myself, we've created a one-page dashboard, which is really nice that we can have for the community, your council members, different folks in the city that will have this one-page dashboard that gives just one page of all of the great things that have happened. So this presentation is 3 slides that make up this one-page dashboard. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what did the services in the city look like before you established this partnership and invested in public safety issues to address homelessness, because truly homelessness is a public safety issue that does impact your law enforcement, your fire department, your residents, your businesses, and those that are unsheltered, your own residents in your city. So what did it look like before the partnership? You had, according to the point in time count, 12 unsheltered homeless on the streets. When I tell you about the data of how many people you have served, you will see that that doesn't represent all of the folks that don't have housing in your community. You had 0 social worker case managers. You did not have law enforcement dedicated to quality of life in terms of addressing the issues of homelessness. You had 0 resources for emergency shelter that you could call your own in the city of Norco. Some of the other things were no dedicated homeless services staff, no programs addressing homelessness, no resources for permanent supportive housing or outreach, no specific grants to leverage city resources, and no partnerships through the continuum of care or your neighboring cities to address homelessness. So that's what it looked like before you established the partnership. So your city council approved the program in April of 2021, and we like to tell our neighboring cities and even cities across the state, because I had the privilege to facilitate Cal City's roundtable on homelessness across the state yesterday. So there are a lot of cities listening in. Mayor, I know you were there, and your city manager was there to talk about this unique partnership that we have and what we've been able to 2 weeks and your motel program was full. So if you look back from April of 2021 to where we are now, you can see your unsheltered homeless population in 2022 was 14. The numbers for the 2023 count should be released in May. The county has not released them yet. You now have 2 CityNet case managers that are 2 days a week, 32 hours a week. And of course, you have the amazing Deputy Wittenberg, who is here tonight. Where is she? Every wave to our amazing Deputy Wittenberg, who is dedicated quality of life law enforcement that partners hand in hand with CityNet, which is a best practice model. When you take law enforcement and couple them with social workers to be able to address the complex issues of homelessness. You also have 8 dedicated motel rooms per night, and you have the benefit of a full-time homeless services staff, me, that provides support to both cities. If you want to take a look at how many successful engagements, that means people that have said yes to some point of contact for service, whether it was shelter or supportive services or meals or a whole host of other housing that said yes. And one person can have multiple successful engagements. It's 418 successful engagements. A lot of people will say folks aren't interested in resources, but that's not what your data tells for your residents in this city. You also have been able to assist 66 of your own residents, whether they were an individual or a family. And all of those that do receive shelter have documentable ties to the city. They aren't from surrounding areas. They are folks that lost their housing in this city. And so there's 10 10 housing placements and 56 motel shelter placements through your motel program. Also, as part of this effort to address public safety issues, we know that we have serious fire hazards in the Santa Ana riverbed. There's been a very successful collaborative effort with that team that I just mentioned, sitting at your sheriff's department, and then working with your community services department. We've been able to, so far, remove 43 tons of debris. That team continues to go out into the riverbed regularly. Just as an example, this week, the Supervisor Spiegel and all of the western cities come together and we'll give updates on how we're doing with the Santa Ana Riverbed Partnership. Corona and Norco, our numbers don't keep increasing. We're managing the numbers that we have. We just need more resources for housing, and I'm going to tell you about that with some of the grants that are coming up. So a lot that has been able to be accomplished in a relatively short amount of time compared to many other cities. Let's talk about program funding and partnerships. So the first 3 bullet points up there to the left, you can see your investments that were for this year, the previous fiscal year, and then the 3-month pilot. So those are your investments to date. And then to highlight for the benefit of the public so they know how this partnership works, that $1 million encampment response grant was a collaborative effort between myself and your community services staff where we sat together, developed budgets, scopes of works. And then also you did receive a congressional award from Congressman Calvert for SAMHSA grant. And I have to tell you, and that was for $800,000. And myself and your community services team have been putting in many hours. It's a very complicated grant. We're still working on it and hope to finish it and submit the application online that is required to be able to receive the $800,000. But between those 2 grants that now you have received, why you've been able to demonstrate you've made an investment with your own city funds, and now other funds are coming to follow to multiply your efforts. So now we'll have more resources for one of the biggest challenges that we face, which is trying to find housing for folks that have so many different barriers. So we're going to have a lot of resources between those 2 grants to provide rental assistance. One program, the SAMHSA, will be like up to 6 months worth of rental assistance. The state encampment response grants, 12 months worth of housing assistance for those folks that some have been 10 years in the riverbed. So we're looking forward to bringing those contracts to your city council for approval and the Corona City Council to expand the scopes of services. As far as partnerships and collaboratives, you look at, you have the partnership between the city of Corona. Of course, there's a partnership with the mobile crisis management team from the county behavioral health. I just talked to them recently. They are stationed in City Hall, and we're going to be scheduling a meeting with Deputy Wittenberg for discussing how that program can be launched in this city. Of course, the Regional Santa Ana Riverbed Collaborative, Continuum of Care partnerships, a partnership with our Make It Cozy warehouse for home furnishings that can facilitate donations from the community. Veterans Housing Alliance, some of your council members have met them. They came and presented here before, where they are providing move-in assistance for homeless veterans, partnering with the Norco Chamber of Commerce, and Faith Community. This is what we did myself and your community services staff. And as a result of that summit that we did to try to launch faith-based partnerships, we had just a unique, interesting thing happen with Bethany Lutheran Church recently. They asked to collaborate with me to write a grant. There's it's like the corporate arm of the Lutheran Church that was giving grants to local churches. So they took our Norco data and they submitted it and they got a grant, and then they purchased all the supplies for hygiene kits for our law enforcement. So I'm hoping that Deputy Wittenberg can come up and show you. And the ladies of the church they sewed the bags for the kits. They're so cute. So they did one for males, one for females. Michelle and I had the opportunity to go to Bethany Lutheran Church on Saturday and help them assemble all of these. And what the Sheriff's Department now has in their possession is 50 kits. And that's just the beginning. This church is very excited to do this. And Michelle got a really cool photo of all of the deputies that are holding these. That's just one example of many where we're partnering with the faith community to take your investments and help more people. So I just, it's a privilege and an honor to be a part of this transformational change. I just want to thank you for your leadership and your vision to support this. I also want to acknowledge your city manager and, of course, the wonderful Michelle England and Alejandra, who are all part of this team along with Deputy Wittenberg. It's truly a team effort. I just thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Karen. Does council have any questions? All right. Catherine.
I'm really excited to see the dashboard and the update, because this is one of the things that came out of our meetings, and looking at how we can communicate to our residents what we're doing, because homelessness, as we know, is an issue that we have. If you can, for the benefit of our residents, kind of clarify and maybe provide a little more context about the motel program, because I think there might be some thoughts about maybe what it is or what's happening. We don't have a shelter in Norco. And so this acts as a shelter, right? So when we're trying to get people off the streets, without having a shelter, there's nowhere to place them. And so could you just kind of tell us how that works, and maybe kind of what residents have to follow to be in that program and to stay in it?
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up, because it actually came up in the roundtable with the League of California Cities yesterday. There were some cities that were struggling with, we don't have a shelter site, we don't have capital dollars for an investment to build a shelter. What can we do? And so I had the opportunity to showcase this partnership, how the city of Norco was able to quickly develop a shelter program by using motels. So it's a private sector partnership. And what we do is, through our contract with CityNet will establish relationships with different motels and hotels. And so we have relationships with motels in the city of Norco. Sometimes, because of our events, whether it's at Silver Lakes or our Horsetown related events, sometimes our motels get full, there is demand. So we do also have a partnership with a motel in the unincorporated area of Home Gardens. It's not too far. So we will, that is a backup plan for us. We do need to have a contingency plan, and that has worked very well. Basically what it is that CityNet will place those that have documentable ties to our city in the motel program. The goal is 90 days to stay in the motel, but so often with so many of the barriers that the folks are living with, whether it was previous evictions, credit issues, or they might need to be connected to healthcare or behavioral health care, it's sometimes they need to stay longer. So sometimes it goes past 6 months or even longer. It just depends upon our ability to get them connected to housing resources. And so because it's a private sector program, we are very careful that if there are any damages to the motels, the contract will take care of that. And I have to tell you, very few times do we have to pay for damages. We also allow for pets, because a lot of our residents in the city that become homeless have pets, and they don't want to leave them behind. I'm not talking horses. I know Bonnie's laughing, because if it were me, I'd want to bring my horses to the motel also. But for cats or dogs, so we have pet deposits that we will pay as part of that. And it works out really well. The motel owners and the management like it, because it's guaranteed income directly from CityNet. It works out very well. It's an easy way to flip a switch and have immediate emergency shelter. It's also non-congregate. So when we went through the pandemic, as an example, motels became very popular to use for emergency shelter. So it is definitely a best practice with the private sector.
And those that are so once someone is placed in the emergency shelter in the motel program, there are certain requirements that they have to meet to stay within the program, correct?
There are. And so the big thing is to engage in case management, and it's not a one-size-fits-all model, because we receive referrals from the Corona Norco Unified School District for families. They come with a different set of barriers and challenges versus like unaccompanied individuals. So case management looks different in terms of, for some it might be workforce development, for others it might be getting them connected to disability income. Do they have transportation? Are they looking at savings, trying to get better spending patterns to make sure that they can be successful and thrive in housing. So it is a case management model that they need to engage in. And then the other thing too, there are rules. So they're not allowed to have guests. Sometimes people will break that rule because they innocently think I'm going to have my friends over and my family over. We're very strict about that. And so, sometimes motel management has in the past, called our sheriff's department or city net. But if you were to ask Deputy Wittenberg, the instances of the calls that the sheriff's department gets now compared to before the program, it's dramatically different because there's a team approach working with folks that have challenges. The other thing too, sometimes people break chronically homeless because it is a public safety issue and you want folks not sleeping in front of your businesses or back in the riverbed creating fire hazards. So if people break rules, as long as it's not some violent criminal offense or major damages to the motels, they can get a second chance. They just have to go to the bottom of the list because there's people waiting for resources. And sometimes with high barrier people, it takes a few times for what we call crisis stabilization.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions?
No questions.
No questions. All right. Comments or anything else then? Thank you, Karen, for your presentation. It was great. And thank you for your presentation yesterday at Cal Cities. It was very good. And it was good to hear the dialogue between the folks that were on the meeting and the problem solving kind of aspect of that. So certainly appreciate it. And I agree with Councilmember Alleman. This dashboard is going to be a really great resource for our residents to be able to refer to and have accurate information. So thank you.
Much.
All right, so we will move on to our council reports from regional boards, and we'll start with Councilmember Alleman. Or we're going to start with Mayor Pro Tem Bash.
I have nothing to report. Thank you. I'm here by myself.
He has to
I
literally
have
say that.
Say that. They should know that.
Yeah.
Nothing to report at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hannah.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the RCTC meeting last week. First time I've been there in about 2.5 years. But the major thing we talked about was the extension of the 15 freeway toll lanes that will be going from the north end of ours up here into San Bernardino County. And RCTC is going to help do a lot of that study and everything, and then they will be reimbursed by San Bernardino Transportation Authority. And that's going to be a major job getting through those two freeway interchanges up there. And on the 13th, I attended the RTAT Now meeting. It's just a small board that works with the 4 cities here. And now through June the 30th, seniors, youth, disabled persons, and veterans can ride for 25 cents anywhere, anytime. This Saturday, April the 22nd, is Earth Day. All rides are free. And the RTA trolley will be in the Horse Week Parade. Community can hop on the trolley at the staging area between Corona and Valley View at 9:15. And the people that have ridden on that thing really have a ball with it. It's an old time trolley. And when I was on that board before, we worked quite a bit with the Norco College over here to get students to ride the bus because, traffic and parking over there is a big problem. And the students vote on that. And RTA could not promote it. They couldn't go in there and try to talk the kids into doing it. And it took 3 votes before they finally decided to do it. But the student ridership is up 65% from 2 years ago. And that's a big plus because of the parking and the traffic situation in there. And Lieutenant, I don't know if they ever clued you in on this part of their buses or not. This happened when I was on that board before, that and I brought it to the previous lieutenant. Each bus has cameras inside and out, and the outside cameras has actually helped the Riverside PD solve crimes. Because if they have a crime in a certain area, they can go back and check and see if there's a bus happened to go down the street about that time, and they've caught several criminals that way. So, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Newton.
Thank you, Mayor. April 6th, attended the Chino Basin Desalter Authority board meeting. We did have our annual reconciliation of expenses, and we'll be getting a little money back this year that maybe Chad can buy a water hydrant with it or something like that. And then attended the Riverside Transmission Reliability Project Subcommittee meeting, and then this last Monday attended the LAFCO meeting. So that's all I have to report.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So April 10th, Unload met mostly just to look at final details for the event that was held by the school district on the 13th. So on the 13th, Corona Norco Unified held the community conversation regarding the dangers of fentanyl. So the Unload folks were at that meeting, and then Crystal Foster was also there for some recruiting for city employment and city programs. And then on April 17th, we had a Day of the Cowboy meeting. So be looking for that coming up in July. So we will move on to item number 2, which is our consent calendar. Does anybody on council have an item that they would like to have pulled?
Motion to approve.
Do we have any cards? Hold on, guys.
I have one speaker card for item 2H.
Okay. So do you want to do your motion now?
Greg.
Right. Okay. A resident.
Okay. Please vote. And motion passes unanimous. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So then we will go ahead and go to item pulled from the consent calendar. So item 2H. Who?
Would you like me to call?
Oh,
comment
yes.
First? Okay. Jeff Cahan.
Good evening, council. Don't want to spend a lot of time. Just wanted to mention how much I appreciate seeing this on the consent calendar, because being involved in special events for many, many years, there was a long time conversation about the vendors having to constantly do these permits and fees and stuff. So by this item 2H eliminating the fact that they have to get multiple redundant special event fees being eliminated is a really great thing and long overdue. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Sure.
Move to approve item H.
Please vote. Green Nation. Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. Please limit comments to 3 minutes or less. The governmental body shall not discuss or act relative to any general public comment. Speaker card is Bonnie Slager.
Good evening. I don't know if you know, Channel 4 was in town today, and I made the guy scoop manure in my yard, so. Anyway, the reason I really asked to speak in public comments is about a year ago, when we started having events again, there was discussion again about additional bleachers for the Ingalls Park area. And I believe the city helped last year with the 3 big events, Horse Week and the Posse Rodeo and the fair, looking at different configurations of bleachers and how the city might put additional bleachers in that would help all of those events. And after the events were over, and I know the city did help quite a bit with the funding of the bleachers last year, I was wondering if there was any follow-up on it with a decision after the 3 events, a decision on where additional bleachers might go and when they might be purchased. And I guess this really came to my mind because for some reason I ended up being treasurer of Horse Week this year, and so I'm seeing how much everything costs. And Horse Week is having to spend over $31,000 to rent bleachers this year. And I know that even if the city put in more, we'd still be renting some for the end areas and so on. But I just, as I look at these numbers, I think of the $31,000, how much of that could go towards the animal shelter, the senior programs, the other groups in town, as opposed to paying for bleachers. So I hope you won't forget about the discussion on bleachers and adding bleachers to Ingalls Park. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jeff Cahan.
Good evening again, Council. I'm here to talk about mules. I want to do a huge shout out. Lieutenant Franzik and Deputy Wittenberg were very helpful. Lieutenant Franzik was well aware of the mule's presence in our area, knew that he was going to have trouble getting across the bridge since being under construction. There's no pedestrian equestrian pathway like the old bridge used to have, so they were very accommodating and made sure that John Sears and his mules were able to get across the bridge in a safe manner. The mules have not always had good interaction with law enforcement up and down the state, but he knows that when he comes to Norco that he's going to be treated well and he's going to be welcomed. And the Sheriff's Department went out of their way to make sure that he was safe, and Deputy Wittenberg was there on the other side of the bridge to welcome him. And I was appreciative that Council Members Newton and Bash were available on such short notice to be able to come and get a photo op, so that when he posts on his blog, which has thousands and thousands of readers up and down the state who follow his journeys, it was a great opportunity for Norco to get the kudos that it deserves because of being an animal keeping and an equestrian town. The mules know when they come here that they've got a safe place to come. So just wanted to, again, big shout out to the Sheriff's Department and the deputies that helped him across the bridge, and for you guys welcoming him into town. Thank you.
I have no further speaker cards, Mayor.
All right, thank you. So we will move to item number 5, which is our legislative matters. 5A is Ordinance 1096, our second reading. So I will ask for a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to adopt Ordinance 1096 for a second reading.
Second.
Please vote. Motion passes unanimous. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we are going to go to item number 6, our public hearings. So today, 6A, we have a public hearing for our in lieu fee schedule. So at this time, I'm going to call upon our Community Development Director, Robles.
Yes, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, this agenda item 6A is a proposal to establish the in lieu fee schedule for the related inclusionary housing ordinance. This ordinance was adopted by the City Council last year, and within that provision of the ordinance, there's a provision that development for with 20 units or less, that they are allowed to pay an in lieu fee in lieu of providing affordable housing on site. So our consultant, Kathy Heed, with Kaiser Martin Associates, is here to kind of give you just a brief overview of how we came about the fees, and she will do a brief presentation, and she will be able, well, her and I will be able to answer any questions that the council may have. So at this moment,
Thank you.
Is the microphone on?
yes.
Great. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name's Kathy Head. I'm president of Kaiser Marston, and I did the in lieu fee study that we're talking about tonight. So I'm gonna just went over basically my first slide. So all I'm going to say is the only thing that wasn't mentioned was that the income and affordability requirements that your inclusionary housing ordinance included was a 6% moderate income requirement plus a 9% low income requirement. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So the first thing that, there we go. The first thing that we did as a part of this analysis is we surveyed a number of Southern California jurisdictions that have inclusionary housing policies that include in lieu fees. And so while they all vary in some way or another from each other, there are some commonalities. One is that typically an affordability gap methodology is used to set the in lieu fee. And what that means is you look at what the market rate price would be and you look at the affordable price and you compare the two, and the gap, the difference between them is the affordability gap. That creates the foundation of how we set the in lieu fee, which is based on the affordability gap of the requirements you have in your underlying inclusionary housing ordinance. It varies by product type. So ownership housing, rental housing, different densities of ownership housing. Also, an inclusionary housing requirement has a stronger impact on smaller projects than it does on larger projects. So then a lot of the programs we surveyed use a sliding scale of the in lieu fee. So the smaller project pays less and a larger project pays more. And then another commonality, and yours includes this, is a defined size threshold under which a project can pay the in lieu fee. And 20, which is yours, is a pretty common threshold. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what we looked at in our study was 3 types of ownership housing. So we looked at what we called condominium projects, which are 20 units the acre or more. We looked at townhome projects, which are in that 5 to 20 unit per acre range. And then we looked at single family home projects that are at 1 to 5 units per acre. Again, we looked at them for the different product types because they have very different economics. So a detached single family home has a much larger affordability gap between its market rate price and a low income price than a condominium would. So that's why we distinguish that for the in lieu fees. And then apartment developments. The only difference in apartment developments that I wanted to mention is that the way your ordinance is written, if a developer takes out a subdivision tract map when they want to build an apartment, then they're subject to the ownership housing in lieu fees. And that's part of your ordinance. Final slide, which is going to be impossible to read. This is the in lieu fee schedules that came out of the analysis. As you can see, we took from 5 units, which is your basic threshold standard, to 20 units, which is the last size project can pay the in lieu fee. And as you can see, for each of the product types we analyzed, the in lieu fee starts low and then works high. You'll see the in lieu fee supported is $34.50 for condos. This is per square foot, this is per square foot a livable area. So it's across a whole project. So you take whatever the square footage is in the whole project, you multiply it for a condominium project times $34.50 per square foot, and that's the in lieu fee for that project. It ranges up to $46.90 4650. See, it's like an eye chart. 4650 for single family homes. Again, that's because the affordability gap between the market rate price for a single family home and the affordable price at low or moderate income has a dramatically higher gap. And then apartments was 2150 per square foot. That's just a very quick summary of what was a very long report, but I'm here to answer questions.
All right, thank you for your report. Does council have any questions? Councilmember Newton?
Good evening. Just one or two to start and then come back under discussion. In your report, it stated you did not find any inland empire cities that are currently imposing inclusionary housing restrictions.
Right, I'm working on Redlands right now, though. I'm working on Redlands right now, but at the moment, no.
But in the big scheme of things, what would be, do you think, your reasoning why no cities in the Inland Empire have done this? Because for your basis, you're using LA County, Orange County, San Diego County.
Sure. Well, I think the reason, I mean, I can't speak to the reason that the city of Norco chose to do an inclusionary housing ordinance last year, but I suspect that over time, like for example, Ontario has looked at it a number of times, Rancho Cucamonga has looked at it a number of times. As I mentioned, Redlands is currently, like, I'm going to council, I think this week, to talk to them about it. So I think different parts of the state have been slower and faster to adopt inclusionary. So if you look at the big cities, most of them have now adopted it. Smaller cities are starting to adopt it, and one of the primary reasons cities are adopting them now is because of the 6 cycle housing element and the big regional housing needs assessment requirements that are being imposed. Is that inclusionary is one tool to fulfill that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions for the
No,
presenter?
Harupa Valley has an inclusionary housing policy, and they set their in lieu fees about a year ago.
I looked at Harupa Valley, actually. I'm not remembering what I saw, but I'll trust your.
Yeah, I believe we're the second city in the county. I was following what they were doing with their in lieu fees. So,
Okay.
yeah.
No, I'll look into that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem. Yeah,
I'll add
so-
it to my survey.
But
I
yeah,
have-
definitely larger cities have started implementing them before smaller cities. Yeah.
Yes.
Mayor, if I can add, my other thought would be also, and Kathy, I'd be curious if you agree. I think in some communities, inclusionary housing imposes additional costs on development. So in some communities that are maybe more concerned about the adverse impacts on developers, I think we're in a different place. As Kathy said, my understanding of why the council adopted this ordinance last year is to really shift the burden for meeting those state mandates for housing and shift that burden to the future developer. And I think that's a policy choice that you made, and I frankly would have recommended that too, because otherwise that burden sits on Norco to do that. So I think as part of the price of doing residential development here in the future, those developers, 21 units or more, they're going to have to accommodate those affordability components that the ordinance states. The 15% of units have to be affordable at the thresholds we've established, and they have to fund that. They have to make that pencil in their pro forma. And so really here we're talking about those smaller developments of 20 units or fewer. The ordinance essentially concludes that's much more difficult to make that pencil. So instead we're providing the option to pay an in lieu fee, and those fee funds will go into a bucket that then the city can use to partner with affordable housing providers and provide separate projects. So I'm guessing though that, in this region, there is a lot of sort of development pressure. And so that's likely one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of these ordinances.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to open the public hearing. Do we have any public comments?
I have no public speaker cards for this item, Mayor.
All right, thank you. We'll close the public hearing and we'll bring it back to council for discussion and action. So, Councilmember Newton, you said you had comment?
Back to discussion. So can I ask you to come back to the podium? So no particular order. Going over the report and maybe just a couple of changes. This was on cost increases, and I think you wanted to look at the Real Estate Research Council to have a cost modification, reevaluate every 5 years, but adjust on a yearly basis. Could that also include the current CPI and the construction cost index?
It can be any of those three, and different jurisdictions have used all three of those.
Okay.
I like the Real Estate Research Council because it's the value of new homes. That's the chart on there. They do an annual report. So that just, I think, mirrors what your requirement is based on. It's based on affordability gaps. Construction cost index is also a good one. I don't like CPI. CPI deals with too many different components that aren't housing related. So in the order of what I would recommend is Real Estate Research Council, construction
And then
index.
construction cost index?
Yeah.
Okay.
Either one are fine. They're both public. I like a published source that's easy to do on an annual basis.
Okay.
And then I do recommend, it doesn't have to be 5 years, but just periodically to just review again to see what's happened in the marketplace.
Well, certainly what we see with our public works projects, I'm not a proponent of in lieu fees because by next year that cost is, well, currently doubles.
Right.
It just doesn't work. So on the overall, on your fee schedule, in my opinion, these look like the bare minimum fees.
Okay.
Per square foot, whether it's condominium, family residence, apartments. That's how that basis struck me.
Now,
And
the thing to keep in mind, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the thing to
no,
keep
go
in
ahead,
mind
please do.
is that you're, instead of just looking at your 15% requirement, it's not those
Right.
15%. It's because no affordable units are being built in the project at all. It's 100% of the units. And so you take the square footage of 100% of the units and you multiply that times these square foot numbers. You can charge more than the affordability gap. The bottom line, the 20 unit per acre one, is
Right.
the affordability gap as estimated in my report.
So, and I guess what I was looking at was like on the affordability gap, then you have your production cost also. Right?
Well,
And I don't know if you wanted it.
I don't want to interrupt. So
No, feel free to interrupt me. You're the expert on this. But I look at it and go, with the affordability gap, how does that work with the production cost?
okay, so
Which I look at it as a component.
understood. Well, see,
Right.
that's what I like about the affordability gap is because it takes that all into account because the market price, right? The market price is the development cost plus whatever profit a developer gets, right? That's,
Correct.
So it's both cost and profit. So that encompasses everything it costs the developer to do the project, including their profit. The affordable cost is set by statute or by rule in your ordinance. So the costs were taken care of in that market price. So when you subtract, you've already dealt with the production cost.
Okay. So then, and I guess this is going back to maybe some more of my basic questions or what triggered this. How will this increase housing supply or contribute to lower prices?
Or to higher prices, I suppose, is the other way.
Right.
Right. So the common question I get to that is that if you do an inclusionary housing policy, are you constraining supply? Because developers will stop developing. And
Right.
if you have less development in your community, then you have lower supply and higher prices. That's the typical argument. I didn't do the financial analysis of your inclusionary ordinance when you said it, so I'm not offering an opinion on what that's going to do one way or the other to your market for development. I'm only discussing, given those requirements, these are the fees that fall out.
Which then was kind of that basis. Will this drive up cost per market rate? Or will it
Okay, so
reduce
just one thing to say
production?
about that, because I always say this, I say this every time.
Sure.
Is on a micro level, so just on a project level, no developer is charging less for a unit than they can get on the market. So it's not like, oh, you added this cost, now I'm going to raise my price. Because if they could have raised their price, they would have. right? They never said, oh, I made enough money, I'm going to stop now. But on
Know that developer.
I don't know that developer.
Right.
I have not met that developer in my almost 40 years of doing
Yeah.
this. But anyway, I'm sure there's one. I'm sure
No,
there's
there isn't.
But on a macro level,
Mhm.
if supply is constrained, then by market forces, prices will go up. So that is a legitimate point on a macro basis. But anytime anybody says, well, I'm just going to raise the prices of my unit, I'm like, well, then you're going to do that
Right.
anyway.
If I may add also,
Yeah.
here, so in response to Councilor Newman's question, so you could charge that at the 20th unit, you could charge that on the first unit there if you wanted to maximize the amount of funding that the city can capture for future affordable. But the issue would be that proportionate to the unit, that fee would be relatively high. I was just running quick math, like if someone 10 units say, per single family, that would work out to pretty close to $100,000 per unit that would be our fee. That's a pretty big burden on that price of that unit, right? But as Kathy points out, the unit's worth what the unit's worth. So then the developer says, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to get
Right.
enough return. So, but that is something we could choose to do, and then people are going to make their decisions. But you're so right about the unit's worth of the unit worth. This is just the same argument the developers use about development impact fees. The development impact fees hurt development, and it's just not true. They're going to charge what they're going to charge, and they just have to make it pencil in their pro forma. So.
Right. And I get that, and I guess that goes back to these fees, which somewhat concern me with that. And I think it all comes down to what, with my colleagues and what council and the city's goal is. Do we want to encourage on-site production, right? Or do we want to collect revenue?
No,
And then we use that revenue for leverage for other affordable projects,
right. No, and
or
that's,
both.
that's absolutely the policy question.
Mhm.
And I think what you've done is you've sort of split the issue by setting up 20 or fewer. Because if you think about it, a 10-unit project would have to provide 1.5 units
Right.
of production, so 2 units. So 20, then that's effectively 20% of the 10-unit project. So those other 8 units have to be able to make up that the affordability gap,
Mhm.
that full $46 one.
Right.
And what you end up with if you go too far, especially if you did it at 5 units where they've got to provide 1 unit, right?
Mhm.
Is the gap that they would take would not only eradicate all their profit, but it would also eradicate their ability to buy land.
Right, because when you take that on your basis of, what was it, 2,600 square feet and change,
Right.
you're looking at $126,000 fee per unit
Right.
on that.
So that's why, I
Right.
really do strongly recommend a sliding scale for this. The decision on where you stop it, at 20 is a pretty common threshold.
Right.
And the other thing you want to know is, do you really want, a project that has one affordable unit in it, but that the developer has to figure out what to do with?
Well, I guess that goes back to, like we're saying, what's our goal? Is it production or is it revenue?
Correct. And that's why if you did it, you're not saying everybody can pay. You're just saying small projects can pay.
Mhm.
But I get why you want production. I understand that.
I would say generally, I would recommend that our goal is to have the developer produce. That is always better. To try to figure out how to produce this. This is not our business, right? So it's much more difficult. And in most cases, that will be the case. The large multifamily projects that are potentially here, they'll all have to figure this out for themselves and have to provide it. And so this is kind of the release valve for those smaller projects.
I was just going to piggyback on some of what Greg was saying. So last year I participated in the Southern California Association of Governments, the Housing Policy Leadership Academy. And while we are only the second one in the county after Harupa Valley, an inclusionary housing policy has so many benefits because, as our city manager was saying, it puts the onus of developing any of these affordable on the developer. And so when you were talking about this production versus revenue, other cities, so if we use Harupa Valley, for example, they set their cost per square foot lower and one of the reasons was cited because they didn't want that cost to just get passed on to people who are buying new homes. But that means that it's very easy to opt out then, right? So then the city gets that money, but then the city is responsible for going out and trying to get projects going. And I don't see that we as a city want to be the sole designer, developer, and bidder of affordable housing in our city. And so if we're requiring them to do 15% of the units affordable, that's going to have, the money's going to have to come from somewhere, right? Because they're required by our ordinance to do 15% at a couple different affordability levels. And so this just gives those small projects a fee to kind of opt out of that to make it a little more affordable for them, just because the cost is so high. So I think our ordinance when we passed it was a big positive, because it kind of takes the, I'm not finding the right euphemism right now, but it takes the ball out of our pocket. I don't think that's the right way to say that. Thank you. Out of our court. Takes the ball out of our court, right? It kind of volleys it over there, but it gives some options, because we do have our RENA numbers and our housing element, and if those went away, it would be a different story. But we have those, and so we need to try to make progress towards them. And I think this is a really elegant way to do that doesn't put the onus on us and just crank up money in that affordable housing account that we have to spend by a certain amount of time, or the state takes it back, and then we're trying to find places to put it and land to buy. As well as there's a benefit if only 15% in a unit in a development are affordable. That's a really great way to do affordable. It's not an entire, huge number of apartments that are affordable. They're integrated with market rate, so you don't see a difference between, anyone who are living in those units. They're the same exact type of units. It's just that a few of them have a covenant, which means you have to qualify with a certain income. And people who would qualify those would be early teachers, EMTs, students, people like that in our community who need housing.
Just to make sure I understood your comment on it's not up to us to find developers. We just have to have the proper zoning. I guess that was what I was looking at. The burden's not, as long as we have the zoning, the burden's not up to us.
Yes, I just meant if everyone could
developers.
pay their way out of it, that money does go to the city, and then we have to spend it.
I'll add to that a little bit.
Down again.
Madam Mayor.
That's fine.
Well, and I guess that goes back to what I was saying, like on our goal is that I think the way I look at it, and I understand this part, but when we contribute to a housing program, I believe it should be in the form of a loan, and we collect interest on that. So portion of that is how we generate revenue. And say, for example, like you mentioned, we purchase some land for an affordable project and we sell that land, okay? But we finance it.
Right.
So we're getting paid back and we're getting revenue on the interest. So it's like you're making money twice on one investment. And
that's right. And I mean, I think if you're looking, but it goes back to Council Member Elliman's various other programs, then it does tend to be 100% affordable. So that's the other policy decision is, are you trying to spread the affordable units throughout the community, or are you trying to get deeper affordability and more units at essentially the same cost to the developer? That's a policy decision. Both have merits.
Exactly. You're leveraging that source for off-site.
Correct.
Yeah.
Great. And I don't make
that.
policy decisions.
Well, thank you.
Any other discussion?
Mayor, just a comment. I don't see in the Exhibit A an escalation schedule, and I know Councilmember Newton mentioned CPI or some other type of escalator. So if you do want to include an escalation to the in lieu fee payment, I think it's probably appropriate to include it now.
Well, Mayor, I was going to go a little curveball
Okay.
on this. And my last answer, I certainly appreciate the work that you put in it and the discourse that we've had.
Oh, thank you.
I sincerely do. One of my concerns is, Mayor, that even though council is responsible for fees, I understand that this is all part of our housing program, and none of this was not brought before the Planning Commission. And so my recommendation is that I'd like this to go back to planning for their input on the overall, whether it's Plan Commission or a joint workshop between council and Planning Commission.
If I may make a recommendation, so again, keep in mind that this inclusionary housing, in lieu fee is part of our inclusionary housing ordinance. We have to have a fee in place because we do have some projects in the queue right now that we have to be able to, apply that fee. My recommendation is that let's adopt a fee. We'll take it to the Planning Commission, get some input, and come back as necessary. But again, we do have to have a fee in place to be able to implement our inclusionary housing ordinance. As far as, should any projects, necessitate the in lieu fee.
And the housing ordinance went through planning. It's just this fee
That's
study
correct.
that hasn't
Right.
gone to
Yes,
them.
that is correct. The inclusionary housing ordinance went to the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council.
Well, I don't want it to go back to planning to say, okay, council approved this, go ahead and look at it and, bless it if you want. I'd like to have their support and their input. There's some pretty smart people on planning right now. And like I said, I'm a little concerned about the fees being maybe a tick too low. Okay. And when you really dwell into the apartment component on this, I think the more eyes looking at it is better. And it may be fine and well the way it is, but I want that feedback.
I have a question. So the fee study was done based on all of the research and all of the data to justify what the fees are. Right. Is there an option to then say, we'd like to increase those?
Sure. Because of the fact your primary obligation is to produce the units, then any option you provide can effectively be anything you want it to be. I would say that you start running into some issues of constraint to housing if you create the fee schedule to be too high for these small projects, because then a developer's in the double bind of it's too expensive to produce them and the fee is more than the affordability gap. So now you're going to produce them. It's not so much that, well, it is so much. What it is, I'll say it in one more, fewer sentence, is basically if that happens, then people just won't develop. Because as I said, you'll get to a situation of negative profit as opposed to, well, maybe my return's not quite enough, but to negative profit, and then they're not obligated to develop in Norco. So it's a balance. It's definitely a balance on these things to constraint to housing or not. And I will say this too, is HCD is very mindful of these inclusionary housing ordinances, and they're looking at them for constraint to housing issues. So I just keep that in mind.
Thank you.
But there is a sweet spot with those numbers.
I think it's the sweet spot. Yeah, I mean, you may get another opinion, you may have another opinion, but
sure.
My opinion.
And I respect that. I guess I'm going to go back to Alma that you mentioned. Well, I know we're moving forward on this, but it's like we have to get this done because there's a couple of developers waiting on us.
Well, not necessarily.
I mean, that doesn't sit.
So yeah, that makes sense. What the reality is that more than likely the developments that are coming into the city, they're 20 to 30 dwelling units per the acre. So their requirement is to be able to provide the housing on site. So this, like, we were saying, this applies only to developments 20 or fewer. The likelihood of that is
Little to none, hopefully.
and the intent, again, our biggest thing is to be able to have these larger developments to provide the affordable housing on site, because basically there's really no other mechanism that we have in place. So that's the bottom line, and that's hopefully what we intend to accomplish is to provide the provision of affordable housing on site, the burden being on the developer and not the smaller projects, which may not pencil out for them.
So what's our time frame on this? If this, to go back to planning,
probably
get planning commission's input on this and give them enough time to study it and make a recommendation back.
We can, let's see, we have a meeting next month. We can probably take it to them next month.
Now, does this jam you up on the other side if you're concerned about a developer knocking on the door?
And again, but keep in mind that this is only for developments 20 units or less, which we don't have any at this time. But it's entirely up to the city council.
Berwin, you had something?
Yeah, I asked Mr. Newton, was you talking about raising the whole thing or just a percentage of them? Increasing the price on the whole thing across the board or just a percentage?
Nothing particular. It's another set of eyes. I mean, we have the consultant's opinion that this is at a sweet spot. Do we concur or not? And does the planning commission concur or not? Even though fees are our responsibility.
Well, I know, but I'll agree with you on letting the planning commission take a look at this and then getting their input on it.
Kevin, do you have any comments or anything?
Yeah, I do. Can you hear me? I feel weird. So for me, my problem is that if we take it back to planning, it's going to cause more time for staff, even though I know they can handle it. But I get concerned, and I think given the amount of housing laws coming at us, and when she mentioned the boogeyman HCD, they're actively going after a lot of people, and they're doing that. I think that any effort we can make because of our historic overlay, the different things we're doing, we even though this city built a ton of houses in the last 20 years, they only care what you've done in their time frame. I just think that anything we can do to promote housing as quickly as possible, I think is in the positive. Because again, the state, I mean, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of housing laws they're trying to put on the books. I do have one question for Lori. So Lori, when and I can't think of the bill number, I apologize. The one that would restrict how fees and things are paid, if that were to pass, how would that affect this?
Yeah, you're thinking about the business roundtable measure. The business roundtable measure that's qualified for the 2024 ballot. Yeah, that's going to make all of these types. All that's going to make a lot of money for Kaiser Marston. Kathy's going to drive a much nicer car and have a second home somewhere. Because all these types of studies are going to go from a reasonableness standard to an exact cost standard, and it will create voluminous work for consultants and very large billings for cities like Norco. It will be very challenging, frankly. So thankfully we're not there at this time, but it will make all of these fee studies very complicated.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, Madam Mayor, I just think let's pull the Band-Aid off and go forward. But I respect what Berwin and Greg are also saying, but I just feel like everything's moving so fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So I guess my thought process on this would be we have a consultant, a professional that's told us this is a sweet spot. We need to probably add the escalator, whatever that may be, into the ordinance. But again, I feel like especially on the housing issues, if we're being proactive and adding tools to the toolbox, that I just think that that's a better way to go. I do understand, if I understand your argument correctly, on the planning commission, we had them approve this one piece and review this one piece, but now we're going to not bring the second piece and have them do the same process per se. So I get that argument as well. So I don't know. I'm leaning more towards just adding the escalator to this and adding it to the toolbox at this time, but I'm open to any discussion.
I'll make a motion to establish the in lieu fee schedule related to the inclusionary housing program and add the escalator. The one you recommended was the
Real Estate Research Council.
Real Estate Research Council.
Under discussion. So, Kevin, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So with your comment of everything's moving so fast and on, and I think the mayor kind of alluded to it, to the best of our knowledge, there's only one other city in Riverside County that has moved forward with this.
Correct.
Correct. Yoruba Valley, we believe.
Oh,
Um,
I'm going to go home and put it in my surveys.
I just Googled it. I have their ordinance right here and their fee schedule.
Excellent. Do you want to email
so
me?
that's why I guess I don't feel that we're behind the 8 ball on this. It's not.
It's not my decision.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I appreciate planning commission's feedback. I just feel on this item, it's just the in lieu fee schedule, and we have our expert here. I don't see what we would change in the analysis or the data that's getting it finished and tied up. Really, this is the last piece. We couldn't do this when we adopted the ordinance because you have to do a fee study to be able to establish those fees. So I agree with, Councilmember Bash and moving it forward and wrapping it up and moving on to the other things that we need to accomplish with our housing element that our staff and our consultant have been working, really hard on, because there were a lot of things in that last housing element, looking at our program where we're taking ADUs, right? We want to look at how we can figure out to get all the ADUs that we already have in the city that we're not getting credit for, get credit for those. So I feel like I would like staff time to go to that rather than, sending this back when I see that it would really probably just come back in the same condition that it's in.
Add one thing, just for your benefit, and I have a 93 city survey, which will soon be 94. This is definitely at the higher end of the per square foot range of any ordinance in the state. I mean, there are ones that are higher, but this is definitely at the high end.
Yoruba Valley's is $2.50 a square foot. Just very low.
And that's Yoruba Valley. And I thought one of the premises that we have with the city of Norco is that we want to develop ourselves into a premier community. So.
No, I was just mentioning.
Yeah, no, and no, it's not directed at you at all. Cost of construction varies dramatically anywhere in the state.
Oh, sure.
So,
if I can interject, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
So I can't tell if I'm interrupting people. I apologize. To Greg's comment that very few cities have taken this on, I just want to point out that Norco has survived because we've actually been ahead of the curve on a lot of things. When we're not, we almost don't survive. And I think, to put Berwin on the spot, I think he would agree that we really try to be ahead of the curve to protect the lifestyle. I know Lori is, I know in my discussions with her, I think we talk about being ahead of the curve. So I think this is just one of those cases where I can't really compare us to other cities. I just think that to survive, we've had to develop kind of a proactive approach, especially in the last 10, 11 years. Thank you.
So we have a motion. Is there a second? I'll second the motion then.
Oh, I would have second. I'm sorry.
It's all right, Kevin. I got you.
Please vote. Motion carried with Councilmember Newton and Councilmember Hannah voting no.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your report. All right, we are going to move to item number 7, which is City Council and Staff Communications. Any city staff have any communications? All right, City Attorney,
No, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Manager? All right, so City Council. Berwin.
Chad, chapter 2 on Pedley Avenue. We did chapter 1 last time. How come they only did half the street? I'm getting questions over there.
Regarding, as far as like the widening?
The widening, yeah, and repaving, and the thing that everybody's concerned about is that one storm drain there by Buzz Reeveslager's house. I think that's 4129 or something like that, that they missed the puddle by 50 feet. Because you and I, when y'all first put them in, you and I was over there one morning taking pictures on both sides of the road. Now they put hills in this other half that they just put in, so that'll probably catch the drain. But down there by his house, it's a mess. And I went over there the other day, and it was almost full of mud. That from where the puddle was to where the drain is, a big pile of mud in there that's going to go down in the storm drain if any water ever hits it. So why did they only do that, or why didn't they at least fix that storm drain while they had the street tore up?
Sure. So when for Pedley, we had a previous project where we did half of Pedley on a storm drain project. And during that time, and that was done 3 or 4 years ago now, I think it was, when we did that first half of Pedley from 7 to about halfway through. When that design was done, we weren't contemplating, as far as trying to, as we did projects, do complete streets and widening, putting curb and gutter on both sides, et cetera, try to help control the flow even better. And that's one of the issues that's occurring, where they have put the storm drain in the right place, but it's just honestly, it needs the curb and gutter to put it and get it to travel to where it should go. But there's too much elevation on that first phase that was done that's kind of blocking it. So our thought was, at this point, is when that project was done, we saw that there's still an awful lot of water that's coming on the other half that wasn't improved for storm drain, coming across those homes that come from the opposite street through the properties and flooding out many of the other residents, and that water's traveling down the trail and then missing some of the other. Process was intended to, in this storm drain project, to capture a lot of that water that was traversing and traveling down towards the gentleman's house that you talked about, also that contributes to creating some of that ponding. We didn't choose to continue the project, make it even larger as far as to widen all the way down to 7th at this time, because we mainly were focusing on, let's capture the water that we have, and then let's see what happens with the water that we've captured before doing any more improvements. Because we envisioned that in the future, we could always do a project that widens the remainder portion of the road, adds the curb and gutter, et cetera, and cleans that up. But we were just focusing in this time of capture the water that's impacting towards 6th Street, see how much we capture, do we take care of most of the issues, and really how much ponding is left, if any, on the prior half that we'd already done. Because it was getting convoluted because we had too much water coming from other sources, and we couldn't really judge, was our first effort adequate enough, or do we need to make adjustments? So that was how we've looked at it this time, that we fully intend to, and I wish it was in place and done when the rains happened so I could really see what happens. But we'll get a good idea of the next rain, a good size rain, really how well it's all functioning, and how well, if there's still an impact on the property owner that you mentioned, and what adjustments we might need to make still on that process. But my long-term plan was to want to complete that street and do the remainder of the curb and gutter all the way down, do the widening, and really just connect all those storm drains that were put in, so that they're hydraulically all connected with curb and gutter, and the water just flows right to them, and they're not meandering around push-outs of dirt and other material that just keep building up.
Well, it may not rain again for a year, you know, but that impacts about 3 or 4 houses and driveways in there when it does that, and it goes back to the old adage that water don't run uphill.
All right.
So, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Greg, do you have anything?
Thank you, Mayor. City manager. So I'd like to compliment staff, all of staff. I'm going to start with Michelle, because in this last week we've had astronomy night, the Easter egg hunt, senior breakfast, the sheriff outreach, and our assembly members town hall, and then throw in a grand opening on top of that. Staff has just done a lot of work, and I just want to let you know we all really appreciate it, especially this last week. And then just to give Amanda a hard time, if you'd stand up, I know you had no major milestone today, and I think you should acknowledge that. It's good. Tell everybody what it is first. Okay.
Yes, finally.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Alderman?
No, I'll just echo those comments. I got a lot of great feedback from our residents who really enjoyed all of those events. And then there was also a spring break camp during spring break. And I personally had children there and they had the best time. So just really thankful for the city staff who go above and beyond to serve our littlest to our oldest.
Kevin, do you have anything?
Nothing, thank you.
All right. So at this time, we are going to adjourn in honor of the passing of City of Hemet Council member Carly Meyer, who proudly and tirelessly served her community for over 7 years. And if you'll join me in a moment of silence, please. Meeting is adjourned at 8:30.